In his most epic rant ever, Jonathan Armstrong details 2 funerals and a birthday party to explain why Tory politicians are failing to live up to the COVID restrictions they have set for the rest of the country. And now a rant and or shout out from Jonathan Armstrong. But before we start, regular listeners to this podcast will recognize that Jonathan is the only person who fully prepares for his rant and shout out. And for those first-time listeners, I just want you to know that we've had extended dialogue over this topic this week. So Jonathan is uber prepared. So no pressure, Jonathan, but do you have a rant and or shout out for us?
I'm afraid I've got a rant, and I'm afraid the mild-mannered Armstrong of the past is on vacation today, and I'm afraid it's also longer than usual. Although I do have a catchy title this time, 2 funerals and a birthday party. It's almost like one of the lesser-known films of Hugh Grant. And in 2021, I attended 2 funerals of very close family members. For one of them, we went to the crematorium. We had to have less than 30 people. We couldn't have a wake for the funeral. And we stood on the roadside and distributed bottled water and crisps, potato chips, because that was all we could do to comply with the regulation. I went to a second funeral of a close family member. We went to the church where we had maximum numbers in the church. We weren't allowed to sing from somebody whose funeral, who really loved singing in church. We weren't allowed to sing. We had to be masked throughout. I gave a reading and had to give a reading that started with a mask on and then took it off for the reading. We went to the grave in a cold winter's day, and we weren't allowed to go inside. We sat in a car park with flasks of coffee to keep warm, and then we had to go home because we weren't allowed to meet. And on both occasions, people attended those funerals with maybe 5-hour round trips, and they couldn't stay over, and they had to attend the funeral, get in their car, and drive home. Meantime, our leadership, who'd put these rules in place, particularly Boris Johnson, what were they doing? Well, they were partying. They were having after-work meetings. And Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, attended a birthday party for Boris Johnson. Boris says it was after work and he was, quote, ambushed with a cake. But he should have known to leave that party. And even if work colleagues were there, and even if his wife had organised it, there was no need for his wife's friend, an interior decorator, to be there. And there was certainly no need for him to stay. He says he was only at the party for around 10 minutes, but he's previously told us he wasn't there at all. Even if it was 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes too long. And my story isn't unique. There are people who've suffered to a hugely greater degree than I have and my family have. There are people who've had to say goodbye to relatives on an iPad because they observed the rules, the very rules that the person who made would not keep. And I don't excuse Rishi Sunak for his role in this. As well as attending the party, and by the way, both of them have been fined by the Metropolitan Police for their attendance. In 2020, Rishi Sunak received warnings for his financial transparency. A former chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, the sort of watchdog for public officials, said, that the Chancellor's disclosures left something to be desired. He said, and I quote, "He seems to have taken the most minimalist approach possible to this requirement. Perhaps Rishi Sunak should carefully read the 7 principles of public life to make sure he is fulfilling the 2 principles of honesty and leadership." And for somebody in a role like he was to be so straightforward would be a warning sign, I think, to every politician that they have to up their game. But what did we hear this week? Well, we heard that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the person who's responsible for the tax affairs of the nation, has a wife who has non-dom status, which maybe saves her more than £2 million in tax. And he himself has green card status, a senior British politician saying that he intended the US to be his forever home, whilst his wife said that she intended India to be her forever home. And as if that wasn't bad enough, part of the wealth comes from a corporation that has lucrative UK government contracts and had furlough payments to keep them afloat and keep employees in jobs during the COVID pandemic. And have a wild guess who the signatory of those COVID payments is, and the author of the COVID payment scheme were none other than Rishi Sunak. So, whilst I have to say for legal reasons I'm not suggesting any legal wrongdoing, it doesn't look open and honest and transparent as the 2020 report suggested Mr. Sunak should be. And very quickly, why does this matter? Well, as you've said, Tom, I know, there's another brewing scandal in the UK over P&O. And the P&O CEO has said that he broke the law in dismissing sailors on P&O ships. Boris Johnson's reaction was to say that you can't be the CEO of a corporation when you admit to unlawful behaviour, and you must immediately resign. But it seems that if you're the Prime Minister of a country and you commit a criminal offence, you don't have to resign. How is that right? How can he complain that a CEO has to resign, but the leader of a country doesn't? And secondly, what was Rishi Sunak's first reaction to these transparency allegations? He launched an inquiry to try and find out who the whistleblower was. So, to add to the woes of lack of transparency, we're now going to find the messenger and shoot him. And again, that doesn't send the right message for corporations. We've sort of grown up, haven't we? There's the odd corporate scandal where corporations try and shoot the messenger. But as a general rule, we've learned over the years that you have to treat whistleblowers with respect, even if what they say is wrong-headed. And UK legislation and new EU legislation gives whistleblowers the type of protection that it seems that the country's leadership now thinks they don't deserve when they blow the whistle on their own lack of transparency. So sorry for that to be a long-winded rant, but I just feel it does need saying. I realise that here endeth my very slim chances of a knighthood, but we need our politicians to show firm leadership in a crisis more than ever, and we need them to do as they tell others to do.
All right.